You're listening to Investigation Insiders by Integris Intelligence.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Investigation Insiders. Hope you're all doing well and staying safe. This is Forhad. We have another great show for you today. My co-host today is my right-hand woman, Jo Morrow. Good to have you again, Jo. How are you?
I'm well. As always, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're both really excited about today's episode. Joining us is a very, very special guest, Geraldine Hart. How are you, Geri?
I'm great, thank you, and it's great to be with you.
Yeah, well, we've been talking about this for a little while, so I'm glad we got it off the ground. I think much of our audience knows who you are and your background, but for those that do not know, Geri is a retired supervisory special agent from the FBI's Long Island office. She left there and became the police commissioner of Suffolk County here in New York and is now the director of public safety at Hofstra University. And she's also an attorney, a product of a local, St. John's University. So I kept it brief, Geri. Anything I missed or you want to add?
No, at the end, I was the supervisory resident agent at the Long Island office, which is a little bit different, but not a big deal.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you clarified that. So having been in the private sector for a long time, we get a lot of inquiries from folks looking to retire and find a second career. And a lot of people have done it very, very successfully. Some have not. Most people are somewhere in between where, it depends on what day of the week you ask them. So we thought it would make sense to have Geri talk about the transition as she has done it sort of pretty successful, not sort of, but really successfully, transitioning from federal government to local government and now the private sector. So, Jo, I'm going to pass it over to you to take it from here.
All right, that sounds good. So I just want to get into some little getting to know you questions here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
First will be where did you grow up, and then how did you become an FBI agent?
Yeah, so I grew up in Northport, in Suffolk County on Long Island, and actually, my story of becoming an FBI agent began on a fifth grade field trip when we took a class trip down to Quantico and headquarters in Washington, and it was after that I was just hooked. I just thought it was the coolest thing, going through. And at the time, they had the lab open that you could walk through and see what they're doing as far as ballistics and different techniques that they're using. And then, of course, it capped off with the firearms demonstration, utilizing the Tommy gun. So I just thought all that was really something that was really interesting to me. So I always say it was, kind of that moment that I was hooked, and I kind of took all the steps in my career to move towards that goal, including law school, because that was a profession that they had, opened up for agents and encouraged. So that was kind of my journey.
Oh, that sounds good. I do like the lab too. It's always fun when you get to visit that area and see how the training is done. Can you tell us about some things that stick in your mind as highlights about your time with the Bureau?
Yeah, so I was fortunate to work all criminal in the criminal division my whole career, which is what I wanted. So, just really starting off with white collar, which was not my first choice, but it really turned out to be really quite interesting, and was able to work a homicide case off the bat, which allowed me to work with local homicide detectives and really just get a flavor, of that, and learn so much from different investigators and different detectives. And then just moving into the organized crime arena. So I spent the bulk of my career working Lucchese organized crime. And there I again was able to work cold case homicides, which were, one of them was the Mafia Cop investigation, which is pretty well known, where two New York City detectives were committing homicides on behalf of the Lucchese crime family. So just to work that and bring that to a close, it was it was out there and lingering for some time, and just really to kind of have the closure for the families was very meaningful for me. And then moving into management in the FBI, which is something I really didn't intend on doing. I was very happy being an agent and working cases, and then to kind of be approached and asked if I wanted to join management, to which I initially had said no. And I was very happy doing what I'm doing, and I didn't feel I was qualified. And I think that happens a lot with women in throughout different careers, but especially in law enforcement. So just to kind of leave my comfort zone, to be encouraged to take this position in management was great. And I went into the city and I led the Genovese Organized Crime Squad, which eventually was consolidated with Colombo and Bonanno as well. So that was a kind of a new avenue for me that I didn't anticipate, but I'm glad I took it, and it was terrific for me. And then just went out to Long Island, to the Long Island Resident Agency, and led that through some pretty difficult public corruption cases, and MS-13, of course, which was really very prevalent on Long Island at the time.
Well, I'm glad you took the supervisory role. That's where I got to meet you, working on the same squad with the Genovese, Bonanno, and Colombo family. That was a good time in my life. Had some good memories on that squad.
Yeah.
You spent almost 22 years with the Bureau. How did you know it was time for you to transition?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was very happy again where I was. So I always joke, I'm happy where I am, so it's time for change. But as I said, when I was in the Long Island office, I was working really closely with Suffolk County on MS-13 homicides. There was a huge uptick in murders in Suffolk during that time, 2018, 2017. So working together on that, there was a new police commissioner at the time who had taken over. They actually, my office had done a public corruption case against the former chief of department and the district attorney. So there was a new leadership focus over there, and just really the opportunity to work together with Suffolk, which I had done previously. I had known a lot of the people I'd worked with had become chiefs, and they were promoted to leadership spots. So I thought this is really kind of a new landscape out there, and a great opportunity. So so I took it, and it was a great decision on my part, I think.
I agree. Well, I think you kind of answered it. How did the Suffolk County PC job come about, which I believe you just answered? Did you know you wanted that job right away, or were you unsure?
Yeah, I wasn't really, again, it took some time to really, kind of think about the new role. It's a big change from the federal system over to local policing. And again, there were some things that happened beforehand. So it was kind of settling down, but there was it was kind of a department that was coming off of a pretty prominent scandal. So, just thinking about what that would require on my part, the team that was in place, the resources. So it was it definitely took some time to make the decision, but again, I'm glad I did.
So with that transition, what helped you make that transition better for you, or is there something that you've learned since then that you could have done better?
Yeah, well, it was definitely, you think about coming from the FBI, which is so focused on, just doing the law enforcement cases. There's not a lot of political interference. Going to a county police department as the executive is different, because you're being appointed by an elected official. You're being confirmed by the Suffolk County Legislature, which are all elected officials, and not too many with law enforcement backgrounds. So it was definitely a different experience. My really kind of focus was on just law enforcement matters, and that politics are a separate issue. That's not always the reality, unfortunately, in that kind of appointed position. So you really have to get used to the politics of it all, and it going in, but the reality of it is very different. So that was definitely a challenge. And looking back, perhaps something that maybe I could have done better. It worked out. I was, I felt that coming into the department, is it going to be more of a challenge being the first woman commissioner, or is it going to be more of a challenge coming from the FBI? And really, I have to say it was a smooth transition into the department. They really did welcome me. I think it was a kind of a different leadership style that I had, which was much more kind of accessible and open, and
Right.
really wanted to learn things that I didn't perhaps know, and being open to those conversations. So that was all kind of new but challenging.
That's great. Do you have any like highlights or good stories about your time as a police commissioner?
Yeah, there are a lot of good stories. It was there's yeah, I think I think we had to get used to each other. I think initially, um, they kind of were used to a different type of leadership style that was, I always say I walked past the portraits of the 13 males that preceded me. And in the words of Yogi Berra, the future ain't what it used to be. So just really to kind of, just really kind of figure each other out. But I think it was pretty simple, because I think I was very authentic, and I hope that I was really just myself. And I think that comes across in any profession, but particularly when you're working with investigators, that they know when somebody is being authentic, and really just, not pretending that you have all the answers, but that you're certainly willing to learn together. And we did some really good work together. And I think, we faced some of the most challenging times in law enforcement in 2020, when we were confronted with a global pandemic and social unrest that had never been seen to that degree in Suffolk County.
Right. I'm sure. Definitely had to give you a good challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your transition to your current role, the Director of Public Safety at Hofstra?
Yeah. So again, really kind of enjoying my place in Suffolk at the police department, and again, going through some really difficult times together in policing, and instituting some significant reforms. That was important to me, to make sure that was completed before I looked to a change. And once that was done, there's never really kind of a good time to leave, but there's a right time to leave. And for me, it was just knowing that this was the time to transition over. It was a tough decision, though, I will say, and it's always about the people, right? I mean, it's really the people that you work with, and it's hard to decide that you're going to leave. But again, the time was right for me, and this opportunity opened here at Hofstra. They've only had 2 public safety directors in more than 20 years, so it's not a lot of turnover. And the position came open, and I thought, you know what, it's close to home. I was commuting from Western Nassau to Yaphank every day, which was quite a trip, and just my children were getting older, in high school and college age, and just wanted to spend time with them a little more, and having a shorter commute, and just some opportunities here in the academic world that I thought were interesting. So it was the right time to go, and that was kind of the decision process that I made.
I could definitely understand the commuting being a factor in your decision. I did the same thing myself.
Yeah, it definitely takes a toll.
Yeah. And I just got to say, as a fellow FBI employee, both female, I've been watching where you've been going, and it's been a big smile on my face to see your successes. So
No, I appreciate that. No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Joe.
Farhad, do you have any questions for Geri on what we discussed?
You know what? All of that's really just interesting to listen to. But just a side note, my son is gonna be attending like the FBI's Teen Academy this summer, and it'd be interesting if he sort of gets the bug like you did, Geri, in terms of interest in the FBI. And I guess that's what programs like that are for.
Absolutely, definitely. Yep.
All of that is really interesting, and it's kind of funny. I always like the perception when you were an FBI agent of what it would be like post your career, and the reality of it. How far off do you think it was?
Well, I would say that each one was different, right? So I think the transition from the FBI to the police department was certainly different than from when I left there and went to Hofstra. But I think the initial transition over from the FBI to that role as commissioner, I think that you have to you really just have to realize that your time is not your own anymore. So the idea that you can schedule things or be home at a certain time, that all goes out the window because they really kind of I don't want to say own you, but you have a lot of obligations outside of the office as a representative of that police department that you simply can't control. So I think once you realize that in your mind, and that was a transition for me. Once you realize that, again, I don't own my time anymore. I kind of belong to the
Sure.
county. Then it makes it easier because you realize that you can't control it. So, and that's really all the things that you have to do to be effective. You have to engage with the community. You have to be out there. You have to make sure that you're attending different events that you normally wouldn't perhaps attend as an FBI agent, just to represent the department and to make sure that the men and women of the department have a voice in the community, because it's important too that the community understands what the officers are going through, what's going on in the department. So it works both ways, really. So that was a big transition, and then that changes again when you go to the private sector, and Hofstra's kind of, I guess, a semi-private, but then the change is that no longer is it strictly the mission of your department of law enforcement, right? So the mission of the FBI is law enforcement. The mission of the police department is law enforcement. Now you're at a university where law enforcement is certainly a high priority and safety, but it is not the sole mission of the university. It's to educate students. So
Sure.
that's a big change. That took a lot to get used to, because you're now kind of a department of a larger mission, and not the main mission. So again, that was a big change, and I would imagine that people go through that when they leave public service and they go to the private sector. That is a something to get used to. Um, but it's really kind of a mindset, and once you realize that you're there, to support the larger goal, then I think it makes it a little bit easier.
Sure. Sure. So I guess looking back on your career, right? What are some of the things that you did to put yourself in a position to not only secure new positions, but be successful once you made the transition? I know you've alluded to some of the things, but like when you were an FBI agent, some people talk about just building relationships, always putting out a professional sort of appearance, demeanor, all those kind of things. What are some of the things that you would say you did well and that you tell other people to think about as they're thinking about making transitions?
Yeah, and I think those two items that you mentioned are very important, because it is all about relationships in the end, and just really your ability to work well alongside people, and your ability to lead people, but in a way that's perceived to be fair, and just open. And those are really kind of important pieces. Throughout my whole time in the FBI, I always worked in task forces, so I was always working together with other agencies. I never, any success that I've had, I will be the first one to say that I never did it alone. That it was always part of a bigger team that I brought together. Because you can't, and anybody thinks that they can do that, I think is on a failed path. So, for me, it was really always about the partnerships. It was always about working together, always just about, being open in those relationships, and then always being open to kind of professional possibilities that you may never have imagined, right? So, you may think that that your course is set and that you're doing X, Y, and Z, but always be open to, something that you've never thought of before, and consider it. And again, I'll go back to the fact that I think that women don't consider those opportunities, and sometimes it's because they feel like they have to have 100% of the qualifications before they'll consider a job. Whereas
Right.
perhaps men will think that they only need to have half, and then they'll take that role and they'll learn, and they'll do it well, but they'll learn kind of on the job. So I always say to women, be open to it. You might not think that you're qualified, but certainly somebody does, or they wouldn't have reached out to you if that's the case. But you should have the support that you need to do it, and realize that you can do it.
Yeah, that's just fantastic advice. And we're gonna come back to that topic a little bit later on. But is there anything that you could have done better?
You know, it's kind of a double-edged sword because you don't, sometimes I think, did I move too quickly into this new position? But you don't want to overanalyze it either and kind of talk yourself out of it. So
Yeah.
you kind of have to find that balance where you're open to change and willing to make the change, but you don't want to jump in too quickly without all the information. So, maybe as it pertains to Suffolk, looking back, could I have been better versed in the politics out there? Because they are certainly prevalent, and you may think that you know it, but there's just so much going on that's not readily apparent. That takes some time to learn. So that that's probably something that I could have done better. Would it? I don't think it would have stopped me, but maybe I just would have known more about just different alliances that you don't know about, and different people really just trying to maybe get at each other through you, and you don't really realize it. There's a lot of that, so that's a challenge.
It's interesting because in thinking about this discussion, truthfully, I wasn't thinking about the politics of, like, again, when you're with the FBI, you're independent, right, of politics, like you mentioned, and then you
Yes.
go into Suffolk County and you're not. And that's, for those considering government jobs like the one that you had, I mean, that's got to be a strong component of evaluating whether it's a good position for you or not. You have obviously a very good disposition, and I think you sort of figured your way through it. But I'm sure there are colleagues of yours that you knew that that maybe don't have that same disposition, that it could have been very difficult for, right?
Oh, I think that's true. I think that's absolutely true. I think there's a combination of thick skin that you have to have,
Yep.
to realize that it's really not about you. It's about some fight that happened years ago that some people are trying to score points on each other, and they just happen to be using you in your position to do that. And you also have to be kind of open to you know how to get things done in a way that may not be streamlined and obvious, right? So you have a kind of list of things that you want to accomplish, but
Yeah.
you're just careening from crisis to crisis within the police department, because and that's a really big difference too, that I should point out, is that in the FBI you really, depending on the violation, of course, but many times you'll have, number one, you'll have autonomy over your case, and number two is you'll have the luxury of kind of setting your schedule, if you can, depending, of course, if there's non-exigent circumstances. But if you have a long-term organized crime case, you're setting that schedule, you're working together with the prosecutor, you're getting what you need to get done, and you have the luxury of a little bit of time to do that. It's not like that with reactive policing, and they're having to react immediately. They don't have the luxury of stepping back and doing long-term investigations. And there are constantly crisis situations that you're just always putting out the fires. Nobody's coming up to your office to say, hey, we did a seizure of 10 keys yesterday. Isn't that great? Like, they just don't, that doesn't rise to your level. So it's always
Right.
problems, and you're always putting out fires constantly. So you have to get used
Yeah.
to that, and you have to be flexible and be able to do that.
Sure. No, look, I think hearing that direct from you, and I appreciate you saying these things, because sometimes, like, again, you need to hear it, right? And hopefully someone listens to this and benefits from what you're saying, because it really is, because you don't want to retire from a career, go into something else for a very short period of time and realize, oh my God, this is not for me, and I should have thought this through a little bit more. So it's really, really good insight. You know, anything else that you would have, any advice that you would have, whether it's, again, local, state, federal government, people that are, looking at a second career, whether they're in year one of their public sector career or year 25, any other advice that you would say, here are definitely things that you should be thinking about, and here's when you should be thinking about it?
Yeah, I think to understand the culture of the institution that you're going to, so whatever that might be in the private sector, or for me, it's obviously academics. It's totally different than public service, but that's not to say that it's worse. It's just that it does take a lot to get used to. But I also think that I think there's a possibility in some of these roles that we move to change them and to expand them. So there's not kind of that rigidity of like a civil service or a typical government job. In the private sector, you have a little bit more room to do some kind of innovative ideas. So here at Hofstra, I'm trying to really kind of expand public safety and make it more obviously more connecting to the students. But also, when I was in the police department and we were doing police reform, there really wasn't a spot that I could go to for the research, right? So we have all these great ideas, these strategies. We're speaking to the community. We're coming up with some pretty innovative thoughts, but there really wasn't a place where I could go to and really unleash kind of the academic portion on it and say, does this work? What does the data say? What does the research say? I wound up going to other universities around the country, some on the West Coast, and trying to pick their brain. So I thought, here at Hofstra, is there an opportunity for us to kind of form that type of hub, if you will, for law enforcement professionals to come to, and really, for us to offer the backing of, and like the horsepower, I guess you would say, of academics to help with these kind of strategies, and really not in a typical way to step back and evaluate police departments without their consent, which is what sometimes happens. This is more of like a partnership. Can we help you implement new strategies? Can we come together and pick the brain of different law enforcement executives here in Long Island that have done things in a very unique way, and maybe share those ideas? So that's kind of something that I'm looking to do. So I guess my advice to your question, though, would be, don't feel like you're locked in to whatever role you have. If you feel like it's maybe not big enough for you or too constrictive, there might be opportunities to expand it or change it.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's great. I think the wiggle room in the private sector is definitely something that's, it's like you're saying, a double-edged sword. There's benefits to it, but there's responsibility as well, right? And so
Sure.
what you were just talking about is kind of an interesting thing. I want, if you don't mind, I just want to ask you a couple of questions about it. So what you're talking about, the hub that you're talking about, you're looking at both active and retired sort of personnel that might be able to provide their input to the hub, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Sure. So, I mean, you think about, and you bring up a good point with retired folks as well. I mean, there's such a wealth of knowledge of ways to handle different challenges, right, that we're faced with. And Long Island in particular has its own unique challenges that are separate, I believe, from kind of urban policing. When you think about MS-13, when you think about human trafficking, you think about the opioid epidemic and how it really impacted Long Island in a significant way. What are some of the strategies that we utilized, and can we pull back from, people that have left law enforcement but have faced some of these things and have some great ideas? And how do we bring those people to the table and talk about these different things? How do we make sure the community is involved in the conversation so that we're hearing from them too, different challenges that they're facing? So I just think there's kind of this void that perhaps Hofstra can be a huge voice in, and I think you bring up a good point with retired folks.
One of the reasons why this came up, and Joe will remember this, we actually, a few episodes ago, we actually had a chance to sit down with Lou Rice. He was retired from the DEA.
Okay.
One of the questions that I asked him was about, because you know this. I mean, when people retire from the Bureau, when they retire from other agencies, it feels like the reach back is not, and I'm not saying this from my personal experience, I'm just restating what I've heard from others, that the reach back is not fantastic. And
Yeah.
I asked Lou very specifically, like, if people reached out to him, what's his appetite for offering his opinions and expertise based on having previously experienced that. And he said he would absolutely be open to it. And I think that's just a tremendous resource of people. When you're not in the thick of things, sometimes your perspective changes, right? But when you're in the middle of it, and you're one of those folks that have to deal with it, it's a little bit different, right?
Oh, without a doubt. And like I said, you're kind of like moving from crisis to crisis, and you're not really having that time to kind of step back and evaluate what you went through and what you could have done better. Or yeah, absolutely, I agree 100% with that. That's right.
No problem. So certainly you have our support. So as you proceed with whatever it is that you're going to do with this, please, lean on us for any support that we can offer. I think it's a great initiative, and I think that it's just really forward thinking about getting ahead of problems before they occur. So good luck.
I appreciate that. And thank you. I'm going to take you up on that because I'm putting together proposals and then, just starting to socialize that.
Excellent. All right. Well, Joe, you have any questions or follow up on anything that we just went through?
No, I'm just listening, and I appreciate the proactive approach you have on trying to just improve the situation and the community and camaraderie between different divisions and units the way it is. I think it's a great idea. Yeah, and we're here to help, so reach out.
I appreciate that. I mean, you think about that. You have Nassau County, Suffolk County, two of the biggest police departments in the country. And then we're in the shadow, obviously, of New York City. So we're just kind of really well positioned to be a real voice on this, And I do think, I mean, even we're talking about gun violence now, right? It's such a prevalent piece, school safety. What we're doing about that. What are some different ideas? And there's just so many leaders and so many people that have contributed so much to this effort in law enforcement. And maybe we can bring it all together.
So I guess I would be remiss in not addressing you being the first female police commissioner in Suffolk County. Just as to step away just for a second, I just want to mention that my mom, another great woman in my life, my mom actually passed away this past Memorial Day. And it's just a fantastic sort of transition into speaking to you, and another great woman, and talk about how it feels to be sort of someone that opened doors for, I guess, not only people further along in their career, but little girls that look up and see themselves in the same role that you are, and even higher.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I have to admit, I was very reluctant initially to kind of make that the focal point when I moved over to Suffolk County. It's very much about kind of the job, and it's not about that. It's about getting the job done and keeping people safe, which of course it is. But it did take me a little while to realize exactly what you just talked about, which is kind of it is an important role. It's an important opportunity and responsibility. So that women can see that, or I should say younger adults can see somebody in that role, and it's not so foreign to them, right? So it's just commonplace. And I look forward to the time when there are no more firsts, that it's just kind of common. It just happens to be another woman in that role. And but it took some time to get there, and then I did realize the importance of it, and started to really kind of embrace it. And it is very interesting, especially when it comes to women in law enforcement. That number has been kind of stubborn over the years, as far as their prevalence in law enforcement has kind of hovered around, somewhere between 11 and maybe 15% at the high point. And that's been for decades. That really hasn't changed much. So I'm always kind of thinking about what can we do. We had a recruiting campaign when I was in Suffolk, which only comes around every 4 years. So what can we do to increase the numbers of women? And I think for us, it was about showing the police department not as a kind of traditional sitting in the patrol car and or walking the beat, but all the other opportunities there are, which might be a little more appealing to women. The detective division, community affairs, different opportunities that might not be known by women. So anyway, so we did a big push on that, and then we did increase the number of women who took the exam. So I'm hoping that changes a little bit the numbers, but it is certainly challenging, and to get those numbers where they need to be, and to diversify the department as a whole, it is definitely challenging, but it was a priority that we had.
Sure. So do you have any advice for, I guess, young women navigating their way through a law enforcement private sector, security career, life, family, etc. You mentioned all of those things during these episodes. Like, what advice do you have for people?
Yeah, and one of the great things about this job is that I'm able to interact with students who come in, and there's been a lot of students that have come in just to talk about that topic. I want a career in law enforcement. How do I make it happen? How do I balance that if I want a family? So really, just to have those conversations. But a lot of it really goes back to the notion that you can do it. You don't talk yourself out of it. There are certainly challenges to it, but realize that if you work hard and you're focused on your goals, that you'll get there eventually. But there will certainly be roadblocks in your way, no doubt about it. Everybody faces them, but don't think that they are going to be dispositive of what happens with your life. You can overcome them. But what I say is really perseverance is the number one attribute, I think, to success. So don't give up on it. Keep going, and then look to others for support. They're there for you, but sometimes you have to reach out to them, but they'll be some of your biggest advocates and your biggest fans. And that's not gender specific. That could be, for me, I had a lot of really good male supervisors and things that helped me along the way, and they were great mentors, certainly, and then great people that spoke on my behalf, because I think women, generally speaking, don't like to brag or speak about their accomplishments. But sometimes you'll have what I like to call verifiers out there who will speak about you and for you and on your behalf. So look for those people too, and then pay it back, right? Pay it forward, so that the next group of people you can encourage and you can be there for. I always say that we have the opportunity to identify these people that could be leaders, whether they're women or whoever's in our life, and then to encourage them. But I think that's our responsibility. I think that's an ongoing responsibility that we have.
Great point.
I got to tell you, I think there's so much that you said here. I really hope people sort of listen to this episode and almost like clinically, because there's so much to unpack in everything that you've said. And honestly, what I appreciate is sort of the candor in the things that you're saying, because you're being vulnerable in one sense and saying, here's some of the things that maybe could have changed, but here are some of the really good things. And I really hope people listen. Jo, what are your thoughts?
No, I agree. I'm like, you've had a groundbreaking career in certain aspects, and you're a natural leader, and I think people will hear that from this podcast and going forward. But I like what you put out there and how you encourage future leaders in the world. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think it's definitely interesting from a female's perspective in law enforcement. I think it's different in some respects. There's certainly commonalities, but there are unique challenges for sure. But again, it's always kind of that, going back to that theme that you can do it, and don't talk yourself out of it. And we don't raise our hands, right? As women, we just don't raise our hands. So we kind of have to be called upon to leave our comfort zone and try new things. And it's hard, certainly hard, but well worth it.
I'll tell you, there's a lot of really amazing women in a lot of amazing roles now, and certainly yourself and many people before you as well have sort of paved the way, and hopefully going forward there'll be even more. So usually we end the show with takeaways. Is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with as a takeaway from this episode?
First of all, thank you for doing this, because I've listened to prior podcasts, and they're really very topical and timely, and I think it's a great service that you do. So thank you for that. But as far as takeaways, I think again, really just kind of, I always go back to perseverance, right? Just keep on it and keep at it, and you mentioned the transition from public sector to private is bumpy at times, but just to really kind of stick with it. I think it's not easy, but I think it's probably more common than people are surprised when they get there and maybe throw up their hands and move on to something else. But I think there are opportunities if you just look for them, and then and again, put yourself out there so that you can find those opportunities and follow through on them and make them successful.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway. And interestingly, the perseverance part, just from a business owner perspective, I could tell you a lot of people ask about, you know, what does it take, right? And one of the biggest pieces of advice I give is you just have to be around. You have to be around long enough and
True.
keep at it. And
Yes.
eventually it'll take a life of its own. So I think that's great advice. And it's amazing how some of the best advice in the world is some of the most simplest, because but you don't think about it until you hear it from someone. So, Joe, what do you got as a takeaway?
Geez, the whole show is a takeaway for me. I mean, just the key points, what you're putting back into the world, I think is more important for everybody. Encouraging the younger generation, particularly women who have not been known to have that voice. So it's most appreciated.
Oh, thank you. We talked about perseverance. That's so critical. But the other piece that I found was so critical for me was communication. So I wonder if that's, again, communicating when I came to Suffolk, because we kind of, like I said, had to get used to each other. But what I found really useful was really just getting out there and talking to people face to face, getting over to the different precincts, meeting with folks, and just really kind of, having those conversations, introducing myself. And then it kind of went to a point where when COVID hit and I wasn't able to get out there anymore in person, I started to do this Friday afternoon email to the entire department. So I would send it. It's communicating in the police department was difficult because it's not like the FBI where everybody has a desktop or a phone and they can access their emails. It's not like that. So you have to really find a way to talk to everybody. So on Friday afternoon, I would sit and I would write an email just about whatever topic was happening at the time, mostly COVID in the beginning, and then moving over to the social unrest. And then I would put it out on the MDCs, which are the patrol car, kind of computers, if you will, where they can pull it up too. So just trying to reach everybody. And I think that they were really appreciated because it was just, just making that effort to really connect with the rank and file. I think sometimes that gets lost, when you're at a high level and doing, addressing emergencies all day long. You forget that there are people looking to you, and that if you can talk to them directly about what's going on and allay their fears, certainly with COVID, when the numbers were really spiking and we were going through a lot in law enforcement to try to get our hands around it, it went a long way. And really just kind of to sign off, Geri, at the end, which to me was no big deal, but they really were very appreciative of that I was just a regular person just trying to talk to them and not, Commissioner Hart and this and that. It was just, one person to another. So that really went a long way. And then that brought us into the social unrest piece and just really thanking them for all the work that they're doing during this, the 300 protests that we had, and then the reform process and getting them on board and getting their buy-in and letting them know what was going on. And I think it breaks down some of the fears that people have of, not knowing, and then the rumors kind of take over. So I just wanted to put that out there as really kind of a practical piece of advice that really went very far for me.
Yeah, I think there's no question. I think that's brilliant advice, and it's something that, again, you could use, and it doesn't matter what position you're in. I mean, every
Exactly.
single level. I mean, that's such an important component to it. So that's fantastic advice. So that's it for today. One thing I'm going to leave our audience with is that we record these podcasts virtually, right? So Geri's in one place, I'm in one place, Joe's in another place. Sometimes we have technical difficulties, but the show must go on, and it does. So some of the sound on this episode may not have been fantastic, but the content is. And so thank you, Geri, for joining us. Joe, thank you for co-hosting with me. Until next time, thank you both very much.
Terrific. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
Don't forget to follow us. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.